Connection.
Hello. This is my November and December reading wrap-up. I haven't posted in a couple of months, largely due to this one who's going to start crying because she's hungry. Meet Miss River Elizabeth. If you've watched my Empties video, you've already met her. That's our new baby. She's almost 2 months old. She was born November 10th. But I didn't get anything filmed because I was having her, and then I was
Exhausted
taking care
from
of her
her.
and everything, so I just didn't feel like filming at the beginning of December. What?
You're also pretty busy because of family around Christmas and all that, and
Yeah.
my birthday and all that, so.
So it's just been crazy, but I've got 2 months worth of reading wrap up. I actually read a fair amount of books. I did nonfiction in November, and I didn't read all the nonfiction books I wanted to, but I read a fair amount. So yeah, let's just get into this. The first thing I read in November was The Unfettered Mind by, Alex is probably going to correct me on this, Takuan Soho.
Very good.
I borrowed that from Alex, and it was really interesting. It's been a couple months, I don't remember all the things I said about it. Do you remember all the things I said about it?
You said you found it interesting, some of the similarities to other philosophies that we read.
Yeah, it tied in a lot to Buddhism, some of the Buddhist stuff I had read, I think like the previous month that Alex had told me about or whatever. And I also found some similarities between it and Christianity, but also the three all tied together.
Yeah.
What else did I say?
Well, I had made that connection, helped you with that connection further by saying that a lot of early Christian thought was influenced by Stoicism, which itself is very similar to a lot of Buddhist thought, and especially Zen thought. And there's a theory that they come from a common source in Greece, but I won't get into that.
Yeah, so that one is really good if you're interested in Buddhism, Zen, or sword type stuff.
Especially Japanese Zen, that's Rinzai sect.
I would recommend reading it. I mean, it's really, really short, too. I think it's the only book on this list that we actually have a copy of, but I didn't want to get up and walk out of the bookshop to get it since I don't have copies of anything else.
And there's Baby.
Yeah. So yeah, that one was really good. I would definitely recommend it. I enjoyed it. And then I read 2 little novellas. The Care and Feeding of Gargoyles and A Gargoyle's Guide to Chicago, both by Christina Henry. And these are both novellas, like I said, that are part of the... My internet sucks, and it's loading. And it's loading.
Gotten only slower.
The Black Wings series of hers, which is really good. The series is about this girl who is, well, I say girl, it's an adult book, so I guess woman, who is a reaper. I think they're still called reapers in this series. And then she finds out she's other stuff and all of this, and it's a really good series, and these are about, and from the perspective of her pet gargoyle. So I really enjoyed those. They aren't necessary to the series, and they don't have to be in a specific, read in a specific part of the series, but they're really good.
Is it bad that whenever I hear supernatural stuff in Chicago, I immediately think Dresden?
No, Dresden's awesome.
Love you.
I love you too. Next book I read was intentionally for nonfiction November because the Unfettered Mind just happened to be, and then I heard about nonfiction November. It's like, oh, this is perfect, and I like nonfiction, so I'm going to do this on purpose. I read The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment by Eckhart Tolle. Tolle?
Yeah.
This was recommended to me by somebody who follows me on one of my social medias. And it was interesting. The concepts were really interesting to read about, but the writing wasn't the greatest, and I kind of had to slog through it. But it was interesting to read. It's not really the type of book I really read, but it was interesting. The next one I read was a very short story called Her Story by Jill Roxy. This is a Kindle ebook. It's like 99 cents on Kindle or something. This was recommended to me actually by the author herself, who follows me on Twitter. And it is basically her actual true story of, so I read this for Nonfiction November as well, her true story of her sexual assault. And it was quite interesting. I don't want to say that it's good because it was true and the stuff that happens is not good stuff, but it was well done. I mean, it's self-published, so as with most self-published things that I've read, it could do with some editing, which is fine. I just have issues. But the thing itself was well done. Let's see. The next thing I read was The Titan's Curse, the graphic novel. It says by Robert Venditti, but the series is written by Rick Riordan. This is the third graphic novel in the third book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympians graphic novels series. Those are the only three that they have so far. So I wanted to go ahead and read this to catch up with the graphic novels. I also caught up with the movies this month. I really enjoyed it. The art is really well done. It still gives you all the story while it's kind of like an abridged version of the book. It still gives you all the major parts of the story. It was good. I enjoyed it. And I hope they come out with the rest of the series of graphic novels because I'd like to read them. The next one I read was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. And I know there is a bunch of controversy about this on BookTube. And I finally read it. It's my first Colleen Hoover book, blah, blah, blah. I really enjoyed it. It was one of those ones where I couldn't put it down and I was like walking around with my face stuck in a book all the time. And
Yep. You were.
that doesn't happen as much as it used to, so when I find a book like that, it makes me happy.
It was actually pretty cute. Watching you run into walls or run into me or...
Oh, come on, give me some credit. I don't run into things that often.
You tripped over the dog several times.
This is one that a lot of people don't want to give a synopsis of because they say it's better if you go into it blind. And for one, I don't really see that with any book. I like to know what kind of book it is so I know if I'm interested in reading it. So if you don't want to know, then like skip ahead a minute or so. But there are a lot of like abuse type trigger warnings and everything. But
It's not as bad as Gone Girl.
well, it depends. Gone Girl is kind of worse because, okay, so spoilers. So don't listen if you don't want to hear spoilers about Gone Girl or It Ends With Us. Skip ahead a little bit. Gone Girl is kind of worse because, depending on who's reading it, It Ends With Us is abusive, the guy being abusive to the girl. Gone Girl is the girl being abusive to the guy. So there's that. Also, Gone Girl, he doesn't get away. He's stuck with her. It Ends With Us, she leaves. And she gets out of the situation. So I did really like that about this book. And like I said, it was a good book. And y'all know I'm not the greatest at telling you what happens in books or that sort of thing. But I enjoyed it. I would recommend that one for sure. The next thing I read is 3 Dialogues by Hylas and Philonis by George Berkeley. This was from my philosophy class I didn't get to finish this past spring, so I read this for Nonfiction November because it was on my shelf and it was short. And it was interesting, but it was one of those things that's like interesting. Would be more interesting if I was in the class and could discuss it with other people. Philosophy's not really my thing. But it was decent. Not something I would need to read again or keep around or anything like that. The next thing I read was Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. I love this. This was awesome. It was not dumbed down at all, but it's still easy to understand, if that makes sense. It was very well written. It was very interesting. I learned things, and I'm really looking forward to reading more of his writing. Then I read The Battle of the Labyrinth by Rick Riordan, which is book number 4 in the Percy Jackson The Olympian series. Give me a second. Okay. Percy Jackson The Olympians, if you don't know, this kid finds out he's a demigod, Greek gods are real, etc. It goes from there. Great series, love it. Gotta get Alex to read it. And I'm looking forward to reading the last book, which is book 5. Had it from the library, but I had so many books out I didn't get around to reading it. Oh, baby, I'm sorry.
What'd you do to the baby?
Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Really enjoyed reading it.
Well, she doesn't seem to care, so...
Next, I read Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, which is the first book in the Grishaverse. At least that's what it says. I think it's like technically a different series, and the Grishaverse is like the whole universe, all the books in it, but whatever. This was really good. It took me a little while to get into it. It was a little bit slow at first, and I don't know if that was just me. It could have very well been just me, and that wasn't what I was in the mood for at the time. But I ended up really liking it by the end, and I'm looking forward to reading the next one. I guess I should be telling you what these are about. Okay. Shadow and Bone is... There's this girl, and... This is gonna be really bad. There's this girl, and stuff happens, and she finds out she has magic, and it goes from there. And she has to, like... I mean, you know, I'm really bad at this. But yeah, look at the synopsis on Goodreads.
You poor thing.
But I really enjoyed it, and like I said, I'm looking forward to reading the next one. Next thing I read was a book of poetry, which I am not a poetry person, but I'm attempting to read more poetry because Alex likes poetry. And it's good for me to be diverse in my reading and all of that crud. But I read Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. Alex read some of this with me. This is one of those more modern styles of poetry, so I liked it a little bit better than I like.
Stuff I like.
Yeah, poetry that rhymes is very difficult for me to pay attention to, so I can't really get into it well.
My favorite poet is Emily Dickinson, and her style actually paved the way for the style that Rupi Kaur writes in. One of those sort of stream of consciousness, almost disjointed thoughts that still form a continuum.
I really enjoyed Milk and Honey. I've got her newer book, The Sun and Her Flowers, out right now, and I'm looking forward to reading that. What did you think of what you read of this?
I thought it was quite good. It was very raw. It didn't have that layered style that, say, Percy B. Shelley or Mary Shelley or Lord Byron or any of the romantic poets that I usually really like had. It was very straightforward, very to the point. Yeah, I
got a lot of the feel of, I'm having this feel, so I'm going to write this, and I'm going to move on to the next thing.
Very much a Dickinson kind of thing. Also felt like she sort of abandoned the idea of poetry as having rhythm. So it would technically be prose by the older definitions, but it counts as poetry these days.
The next book I read was also a poetry book, and that was the first book I read in December, and that was Born to Love, Cursed to Feel by Samantha King. I liked this one as well, but it didn't stick with me as well as Milk and Honey did, and I think I like Milk and Honey's style a bit better. But I would still recommend both of those. I enjoyed reading both of them, but I just like Milk and Honey a bit better. Then I read Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire, which I absolutely loved. You probably heard everybody talk about it by now, but it's like portal stories, which I hadn't heard of that being like a thing. But it's like Alice in Wonderland, Narnia. Kid goes through a doorway of some sort, ends up in another world.
Oh, Captain N. Way too young. Go ahead, sorry.
And then they come back. And when they come back, obviously nobody believes them, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of them go to these schools. And this starts out talking about this girl that came back, and she starts going to the school, so you meet other people at the school, and people start dying, you find out what happens, etc. It was really good. I was really looking forward to the next book. Segueing into the next book I read was Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Seanan McGuire. Spoilers ahead. If you don't want to hear, like, fast forward a little bit. So this book was about two of the characters from the first book, Jack and Joe, Jacqueline and Jillian, who went to this world where there are vampires and stuff, and all of that. So it talks about before they went to the world, and then going to the world in their first few days there. And it talks about while they're there. And then, of course, it talks about after they get back in the first book, so that's cool. But these books are both very short, and I really enjoyed that they take the story from some of the characters in the first book and tell us about their world and what their story was. Like what Alice's story was, or what Narnia was, you know. We get that with this.
Passed out baby.
So I really enjoyed that. The only problem was, at the end of the first book, they go back to their world. And I wanted to hear more about that. But I didn't. I just heard about, oh, they get back home. That's it. I didn't hear anything about between the point when they get back home and they go to the school. I didn't hear anything about when they go back to their world. And I wanted more of that. It left me wanting more that I didn't have. So I was a little sad about that. My other problem is, so that's the second book. The third book, we'll see, it's not out yet. It's supposed to be a more direct sequel to Every Heart a Doorway, but from the title, it looks like it's about another character from the first book, which is cool and all. But the person that seemed to be the main character in the first book, I want to know more about her. What's her backstory? What was her world? I want to know more about that. So I hope there will be a book like that in the future of the series. But so far, I'm loving this series. I just think you could have done more with Down Among the Sticks and Bones, but it's very well written. I'm loving it. And then the last book I read, and I realized there are still like 4 hours left in 5 hours left in 2017 and December, but I am banning myself from reading anything until tomorrow because I wanted to go ahead and film this. So the last book no, not the last book. There's one more book. I read The Crown by Kiera Cass, which is book 5 in the Selection series. The Selection series is kind of dystopian. It's really good. The first 3 books were a trilogy, and then she added on the last 2 books, which ends up being about the main character in the first 3 books. It's her daughter. So I'm not enjoying the last 2 as much as I enjoyed the first 3, but they're still really good. And this one was very good as well. I can't really tell you much about it without spoilers, but I read it and Down Among the Sticks and Bones when I went down to my grandma's for Christmas, and I thought, oh, this will be plenty of books. Well, I ran out of books. So I borrowed The Fallen from my cousin, and that is by Thomas E. Sniegoski, Sniegoski.
Might be Snagowski.
Yes, Snagowski, which is the actual last book I read in December. And it is book 1 in the Fallen series. And it's about this kid who finds out he's a Nephilim. And not only is he a Nephilim, and people are trying to kill him, of course, but he's also the one talked about in this prophecy from like centuries ago.
Love you.
I love you. Quit making faces at me. And he has to do X thing and all of this. So it was really good. I really enjoyed it. She said it's like one of her favorite series. So when I say I read The Fallen, she has this like bind up, which is apparently the new numbering that has The Fallen and Leviathan, which are the first 2 books. I just read the first one, The Fallen. I started on Leviathan, but I hadn't finished it because I came home and I've got it ordered from the library, but it's not here yet. Blah blah blah. It was really good. Would recommend it. Looking forward to finishing the second book. And that's everything I read in November and December. I need a serious drink of water. Don't forget to subscribe. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or want to talk spoilery things about any of these books down in the comments. Did you do a wrap up? What did you read the last month or so? And I will see you guys next time. Bye.